I'm sure you're probably well known amongst the group here, but I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourselves for anyone that hasn't met you before. Please start, Rishi.
Hi guys, I'm Rishi Bedi. I am representing Ogury. I lead APAC region, and we can talk about Ogury outside. We have a booth and a lovely team. You can meet them later.
Fantastic. Brian?
Hi, my name is Brian, and I work for HP. I lead Programmatic in HP that we base out of Singapore. And I also look after Japan and the Australia markets for the digital overall.
Thanks, Brian. Bharat?
Thank you for coming here. My name is Bharat. I lead digital practice for Omnicom Media Group across Asia Pacific, and I also represent IAB, SCA, and India Council.
I'm Richards. I'm part of our integrated strategy team at Dentsu. That's across all of our capabilities and across all of APAC, so a very diverse opportunity. Great to be here with you today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, gentlemen. For this panel session, I should mention as well, we've also got a poll question. If I could just cue that poll question so people can see it. In your event app, there is a poll tab. If you click on the poll tab, you'll be able to vote. I'm going to throw back to this question towards the end of the panel session. I want to know from everyone in the audience how important privacy is in your role. Thanks very much. We can now go back to the slide, the panel slide. Fantastic. So, obviously privacy is critically important to every single one of you here on the stage, but you're going to have very different perspectives on how this is handled. We also know that approach to privacy across the APAC region is a little bit fragmented. It's not necessarily driven by regulation and government legislation. So I would like a perspective from each of you, your corners of the industry, how you approach privacy compliance within your business, how important it is to you. Let's start with you, Rishi, from the tech stack point of view. How has sort of adhering to privacy regulations, perhaps in other regions, sort of influenced the way that you're building out your tech platform at Ogury?
Sure. So in some ways, I'm representing the open internet, right? Because I get to work with a lot of organizations as an adtech or digital marketing platform. So I think there are markets in APAC where privacy is being driven by regulatory frameworks. There's Australia, you've got Singapore, you've got Korea. Other markets are catching up. But it's fairly complex. And it's really, really difficult for any large organization to understand what's happening unless they have a strong intent to build a large framework across the region. And what I see some organizations are doing, either investing into localized governance practices, have somebody like a DPO or data protection officer, or either designated or appointed, depending on how large their company is. In terms of tech side, I see there's either focus on building privacy by design in the framework, grounds up, or working with partners that are already operating in a very privacy-first, privacy-focused, respectful, consented solutions in the data collection or audience building processes.
Yeah, okay. So, really guided, I guess, in part by what the market is sort of demanding of you as a technology provider. Brian, I'm going to come to you from the brand perspective. How are you approaching privacy from an HP point of view? And maybe you could say a little bit about what that's like from the perspective of engaging with various ad tech, marketing tech platforms.
Yeah, I think for us, being a global company and having, our headquarters in each offices in each market, we take like the bigger approach of getting everything at the strictest level. So following GDPR where we have to, where even though we don't have to in each market, we try to get the highest level to make sure that we're protected. So from a collection perspective, it's adhering to the highest standards that we can. This way we are kind of protected from each point of view. I had one example actually that we had a partner in India where it was a payment partner where we were starting the onboarding procedure, getting all the procurement and law stuff figured out. And when we got to the are you GDPR compliant, we had to pause everything because it wasn't GDPR compliant. Only once they were able to fully give us the evidence that they started to be GDPR compliant, then we started to use them. I think that would be the biggest one from how we're looking at it from the different partners. And I can add a little bit more from an activation perspective.
Yeah, please do.
We've gotten more and more strict in terms of like how we're looking at third-party data. In 2022, we ran a study with Melbourne Institute and MIT to look at how our the quality of our third-party data, where we were targeting IT decision makers. Throughout the study, we would look at long enough period where we surveyed people who we had targeted, and in the event of like where we've seen like the third-party cookie saga and everything going down, we noticed that when we see third-party data, we have to question it because it's not always what actually it is. So I think that was a peer-reviewed study, and ever since then, we've started to look at privacy, data, and in a new lens of really questioning and making sure that we're up to par on like what's going on in the market.
So it's almost as though, being a US-based company, you're using legislative controls in other international markets as your kind of, gold standard, right? And you're expecting then all of your partners that you work with to be able to adhere to that standard. I'm sure you get mixed reactions across the APAC region from that. I'm sure that's not always easy, right? I'm going to come back to you on that, but I'm now going to go over to the agency folks to hear a bit of their perspective. Bharat, tell us how you're approaching this from within your agency group. And maybe you can give me a bit of perspective on what that's like dealing with the fragmentation piece across APAC, because as Brian's given an example, surely brands are approaching this differently depending on whether they're international brands or whether they feel some compulsion either just morally or due to privacy legislation.
I think overall we are seeing a fundamental shift, especially in Asia, because Asia is no more waiting for the global counterparts to actually create a new policy and then replicate that policy. If you see markets within Asia, whether it's Australia, India, China, the laws are becoming more stringent. I know it's not being discussed front and center the way AI is being discussed in every forum right now. And it's a fact that all the marketers in the room are maybe interested to understand what's the new thing happening in privacy, because it's been 5 years, the debate, the battle, the regulators, the big tech giants. And somewhere down the line, I think we have now got into a swim lanes where we are seeing the tectonic shift happening. When I started, I think 17 years back, buying audiences was the focus area. And then this whole privacy and the data guardrails and what the walled gardens have created in their own mammoth style actually changing the whole investment strategy. So the shift, what we are seeing is right now happening from audience buy towards signals. And why this signal emergence is happening, because we believe or not, half of the buying on internet is actually done by these AI agents, whether it's PMax, Demand Gen, AS+. So when AI is actually deciding the placement, the bid, the budget, the AI agents don't rely on whether you are a male 24 to 34 or demographic. They actually work only on these signals. And somewhere down the line, the market has now packaged all these signals as privacy-safe, compliant signals. So that's one side of the industry. But at the same time, there are two types of advertisers which coexist in Asia. One which is doing the catch-up game. Whenever the regulation change in one market, let's say a new regulation in Indonesia comes in, so they would try to bring a consultancy team, understand how it impacts their business, what changes they require. And on the side, we see an advertiser within our portfolio which is already thinking about how to build privacy-enhancing technology, whether it's about understanding the changes in the consent ecosystem. It's no more giving an option to opt out. It's explicit opt-in options, which the law has designed. And at the same time, we also see the global regulators now being blindsided. Big data crappers companies like Scale.ai getting acquired by big tech giants, which is also a fact that Asia needs to think about what is relevant for our market landscape and how can we build our consumer trust as a brand, as a company, as a platform. So I agree with what Rishi said. Privacy by design is not a product offer that you need to give to your customer and client. It's the mandatory compliance requirement. Don't think just about fines. Think about one data leak, how can it impact your consumer trust? And today morning itself, a big airline company in Asia got around about 4 million customer data being leaked because of cyber criminal activity. But at the same time, these 4 million customers are worried about their PI information being leaked online. So start thinking about not just as a product feature that you buy, but think about it's a compliance and a mandatory requirement.
Yeah, that's super interesting because it has a direct relevance, obviously, to our daily lives, and we see what happens to brands that become subjected to cybersecurity attacks. I don't know if anybody tuned into the news of a couple of months ago where Marks and Spencers in the UK had an enormous cybersecurity attack and had to shut down their entire e-com offering, which has a massive impact on their financial outlook. So, Richard, I'd like to hear from you your perspective. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about the approach from dentsu, but I know when we chatted, you and I talked about the juxtaposition between, on the one hand, taking privacy seriously and understanding that it's a core part of the marketing and advertising mix, but how actually the way that consumers move around and shop and, consume services, search for content and consume products is sort of in a bit of a direct contradiction to the whole notion of privacy. So walk me through that a bit.
Yeah, I think we have to start with the recognition that it's basically impossible to maintain your privacy today, right? Like, you need a phone to access your bank. As soon as you have a phone, all of your data, or huge amounts of your data, are used by those companies and those suppliers, and that is inherently eroding your privacy. And so for us, we try to think about privacy. We're strategists, we like a reframe, right? So when we're talking about privacy, it's often through this lens of optimizing some kind of digital ad experience. But I think what we have found through our long-term understanding of consumers is that they hate ads, and they really hate digital ads. And so the reframe is not about how do we collect more data in a privacy-compliant manner such that we can optimize that digital ad experience, because we think that that's probably not going to drive many results. But it's about reframing it and understanding how we can engage that audience against things that they love, and they might welcome a brand into that space, like gaming or sports or entertainment or fashion and all of that constellation of passions that people have. And so then I completely agree. It's more so about signals than identity. And so the kind of data that we're looking to capture is cultural, it's conversational, it's commerce-related data that gives us that more dynamic understanding of how people are responding to the world around them, rather than I need to understand Richard and how Richard buys and how Richard thinks about brands and where he lives and all that kind of thing, which is just a more kind of static and partial view of that world.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I guess it leans somewhat into the shift in technology tools and solutions. If we accept that the internet environment that we're moving around these days is much more fragmented than it was even, say, 12 months, 2 years ago. And so for brands, reaching customers is becoming a little bit more difficult and a little bit more fragmented. But for technology, it's about enabling exactly what you just described there, Richard, which is not such personalised data that we're following an individual around to target them with ads, but something that's a little bit more interest-based. From a tech perspective, Rishi, maybe talk us through what you're doing at Ogury to sort of move the world on from ID-based personalised advertising and instead thinking about it in terms of characteristics.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm glad you brought that topic up about not identifying individuals. And we need to step back and see what's happening in the industry. We had, for years, for decades, we had cookies as our base for creating audiences. And then we got identifiers from apps, devices, Android IDs, IDFA, and some of that started changing as Apple and maybe soon Google decides to make some changes to the way they allow identifiers to be tagged for various marketing objectives. And then we have seen recently some flippy-floppy kind of approach on the cookies itself. Now, what does it tell us? It tells us clearly that what worked for the last 10 years, 20 years is not going to work in the future, right? And so one is that tectonic shift in the technology landscape that's happening. So we need to prepare ourselves. So one is privacy, the other is resilience and preparing ourselves for future. We're not going to be deciding to change our strategy because now this tech platform made this change in the way access would be provided to this data point, right? So that's what's going to happen. Now, when we talk about Ogury, we call it personified advertising. We started actually somewhere around or slightly before GDPR came into existence. So, consent, respectful collection or exchange of value with consumers was in the core build up, grounds up, when we started thinking about how we want to identify or engage with consumers. So there's an element of trust. How do you exchange value? So consent management right from the beginning. So what we do is we connect with consumers. We run millions of survey questions, always on. We think the best data is that consumers declare themselves. They tell us. They don't want to tell us, that's okay. We collect it in a respectful manner. Of course, we have consent, and then we layer that information with a lot of other signals like semantic signals coming, or we've got some environmental around, what device or what technology are they using right now. And then we, of course, use a lot of AI or tech to merge that, but we never try to identify individuals when we are targeting or trying to go after. We look at this cohorts of audiences, and we say, look, we will remain not just compliant, respectful, and then identify these consumers in an environment where they are. We've got a lot of data, very strong data, but we don't want to pinpoint on who that is Rishi. Why? If I know that Rishi has these 200 interests based on the data points, then I just want to find more and more people like Rishi. I just don't want to pick up Rishi where he lives, what's his address, what's the device ID, what's his... No, we don't want to do that. And I think with true exchange of value, staying compliant, thinking about long-term resilient solutions that are not dependent on technological shifts, and staying with an approach that just looks for consumers in a personified kind of manner is the future of advertising, rather than depending on just identifiers and changing games based on other players.
Yeah, okay, super interesting. I'd like a brand perspective on this, but just pause for a second, so I'll give you a chance to think about that, Brian. I want to throw back to the agency point of view. Bharat, how does that sound from your perspective? You talked a little bit about privacy-enhancing technologies. Also know that you're keenly involved in the IAB here that works on the Privacy Council. What does that sound like to you from an agency and buyer perspective?
I think in a ground reality, the problem what we face is right now there is a closed internet where there is a good value exchange with consumer. Consumers feel more safe in the closed internet. It's an in-app environment. The data exchange gives them some meaningful value. On the other side, in the open internet, there is too much trouble for a consumer and the low value exchange. On the open internet, we see a lot of these third-party platforms, whether it's a supply-side platform, whether it's a data broker, everyone is just riding the same consent wave. What you mentioned about the banking regulations also, we have now seen most of the card operators are actually monetizing the data. So something when we talk about privacy on open internet, it will always be questionable. But coming back from an agency lens, when brands talk about, is fragmentation a problem? Yes, it's a problem from an investment strategy point of view, which channel, which media you need to maximize. But if we think from a strategy lens, fragmentation is now becoming an opportunity. You don't need much of this granular data to do personalization. You need to think about if fragmentation is happening in one platform, in one cohort, what is the cultural movement that riding in? Performance is no more about getting a click, making the user land on a website, read the content, make him fill a lead form, ask him to visit the store. That's the old school funnel. The funnel is already broken down. And if you think about the new consumer journey, it starts with watching a content on a social platform. It starts with engaging with the creator, which is doing a live stream. It's about engaging with the conversation which is happening on that environment, whether it's Reddit or Quora. So how can you connect with that brand in that same moment in that platform? Understand the cultural relevance in which the consumer is connected, how you integrate your brand within that cultural elements. For that, you don't need any type of a personalized PII data, targeting him cookie or a device ID. There are opportunities what lies on CTV, on retail media. And then how you understand more towards the end of the journey. Is the end of the journey happening on a WhatsApp business messaging where he's giving you confirmation to book a test drive? Or is it happening on another social media page where he's actually buying your product through a TikTok shop? So every brand is now thinking about what's the new consumer journey, how much minimalistic data I need to understand and make fragmentation as an opportunity, not a challenge.
Richard, have you got a view on that? I mean, Bharat paints a really interesting picture of that new consumer journey. And, that is exactly sort of the touch points at which people will give up their data in order to access a particular product or a particular service. How are you viewing that through your dentsu lens of, let's worry less about chasing somebody around and more about the quality of the messages that we're sending in the most appropriate channels?
Yeah, I think there was a comment already about value exchange. And I think we've been running our data consciousness project to understand people's attitudes to data and privacy across APAC. And I think what we've found from that kind of study is if you ask people, do you care about maintaining your privacy? They'll say, yes, I care about maintaining my privacy. But their actions are counter to that. And the value exchange is crucial to that. So there are some general and maybe unfounded or maybe racist viewpoints that TikTok is unsafe, right? It's Chinese, therefore it's unsafe. But we love TikTok's algorithm, right? Because the value exchange is fantastic. Yes, we're giving it data, but we are constantly entertained, and that payoff is worth it, right? The abstract notion of is my privacy being eroded doesn't exist in that reality. You're just, this is fun, this is fun, this is fun. And I think the same is true of people who are creating content on those kinds of platforms. So I was on TikTok this morning, and there was a post by a lady who was talking about the challenges of parenting a child with very severe disabilities. Now, if you rewind 30 or 40 years, she would have not shared that with loads of people. She'd have shared that with a close group of friends and a close family members, and that would have been very intimate and private and personal. She's sharing that online, but for those same reasons, right? Like if she was sharing it with her small group of family and friends, she may not have found people who can relate to that. But if you share it online, you find people who relate to that, you find your community, and that is very emotionally powerful. And so it's finding those value exchanges that make data sharing worthwhile. And so kind of going back to this point around, are we just optimizing digital ads or are we doing something more? I think we should challenge ourselves as agencies and our clients as brands. If all we're doing is optimizing digital ads, that's not good enough, right? We need to push the thinking much further to give that value exchange and that more fundamental emotional payoff as a result.
Yeah, super interesting. Brian, HB's a particular type of brand, but how are you then approaching your advertising from that point of view? How are you thinking, okay, let's think about the value exchange that we can be, that we can be facilitating with our customers, and therefore what type of advertising are you, beyond the data approach that you mentioned earlier on, you have a gold standard and everybody that works with you has to adhere to that. How are you finding your audiences, basically, and is some of this resonating with you?
Yeah, actually, a lot of this resonates with how we're already thinking about media and advertising. I think what Rishi mentioned on being respectful and making sure that we get all the right opt-in data, that's super important for us. When we talk about signals and how we look at an audience has changed throughout the years. I think from a tool-wise, we used to have a cookie-based DMP. We moved it more to a device ID because we, as a company, have a lot of first-party data that we still find very important to us. We have telemetry data from our PCs, from our printers that we need to leverage. The problem with that is scale, especially in Asia where the scale and the quality of data, because everyone is in walled gardens or in the closed internet compared to the open internet, it's really hard to manage that. So what we've started to look at is how do we look at not just Brian who owns this laptop and everything, but how do we look at it from the signals perspective? I'm in tech. I must be reading tech-related business articles. I'm looking for a business, looking mainly B2B. I'm looking for more like Forbes and Economist, that kind of stuff. It's funny, we're going back to how we look at media and advertising before all the over targeting was, where if you want to target someone who's into finance and tech, you target Forbes, you target places where they are, and these are the signals that we started looking. And in terms of value exchange, by making sure that we are in these places where our audiences are most likely to interact, I feel like that's the value exchange that we can provide, making sure we're not on an MFA website gathering like 1 million clicks, but we're actually in places where we think that our audiences spend time on the internet, whether it be on the open internet or whether it be through creator programs and TikTok. And it's managing all of this, like to what Richard said, there's no way we can get a unique reach for everything. Just, it's not how it's made. But it's like getting all these variables together and coming up with basically a methodology and like a thinking of like and a POV of how we to get it from our perspective is what's important to us.
Is that causing you to look at your data assets in a particular through a particular lens? So not just about trying to find or trying to think of other products that you can sell to people whose first-party data you've already got, but do you think about the value of that data in a wider context? And do you ever think about activating that data outside of your own advertising efforts? I ask because, I mentioned at the top of the day, if you look at the sort of technology stack for a retail media network, actually that can be applicable to any data-heavy business that's got a lot of rich first-party data. So, yeah, what's your strategy there?
We've started, actually. Basically, in the US, we've also launched some retail media capabilities. And when we say retail media, it's not just like e-commerce or TikTok but there's also just leveraging our own first-party data that will benefit our consumers. We're doing it first on our publisher platforms. So we are exploring it here, but because of data restrictions and making sure that we're all GDPR compliant, it's launched in the US, but I don't think we're going to start anything yet so far.
Here in Asia, not yet. Okay.
Not yet. Risk is too great. Let's keep it first in the US since we are US headquartered. We don't want to risk GDPR compliance.
Yeah, non-compliance. It's super interesting. It still brings us back to this position where we wonder if the regulation is driving innovation or if actually it's innovation that has kind of, driven the regulation. I'm going to change gears just for a minute and talk a little bit then about proving the effectiveness perhaps of, from a technology platform point of view, of advertising and making tech tools available that bring together sort of cohorts instead of something that's personalised. What's your view on proving effectiveness and being able to, prove to your clients that these are tactics and tools that work better than what they might have used before?
Sure. And before I share some more thoughts, when I was listening to Brian, it just came in my head that eventually what are we trying to solve here with the entire advertising ecosystem? We're trying to create connections between a brand like the one Brian represents, or any brand, and the consumers who leverage those brands. These are true relationships that brand wants to build, and in that effort to build relationships, the more the brand understands about who are the people who love or consider their brands, I think that's the objective we're trying to meet. Now, in that same context, when I look at metrics, what's a successful metric for my campaign? The answer can be very nuanced, or the answer could be as simple as whatever the brand is trying to derive out of that campaign. It's a new launch. They just want to create awareness. Awareness has some metrics, which most people in the room know. And even though we are talking about an environment which does not pick up or identify individuals, goes after segments or personas, I think the core metrics of the effectiveness of that campaign should be pretty much the same. So we don't need to really create new metrics, new ways of measuring. Of course, there is a need for understanding consumers across various channels, various medium. That's a very omni-channel kind of a conversation, but it's the core success of the campaign should not be dependent on whether it's an identifier or not an identifier. So we think we need to meet the objectives of the brand for that, whatever outcome they're trying to drive.
Yeah, okay, and so a slightly more holistic approach as well, right?
Absolutely.
Trying to, I'd like an agency point of view on that. Bharat, do you feel that this, in our quest to satisfy privacy regulations and also to maybe adhere to the notion of better quality advertising, have we got the right metrics proving the value of that approach?
I think it depends what brand is looking in, and every brand is in a journey across the funnel, across their life cycle. Where the brand is in the stage of building the brand, top funnel. Like I said, it's not about building a 30-second TVC and doing a mass audience shoot, which will help you build a brand. You need to understand the fragmentation of the platform, the cultural relevance. So for us, it's like a adopting privacy-enhancing technologies, let's say, a basic thing would be deploying a clean room because the measurement ecosystem is already broken. So how can we help brands understand what media, what channel, what time of the day, what investment is actually driving that return on ad spend for you, is a hygiene. So most of our brands, they're already building their own clean room with us. So we have Analect, which is our in-house engineering capability. So all clients get, by default, an offering, whether it's the Google Ads Data Hub or Facebook Advanced Analytics. So we are the pioneering holding company at this stage, which has actually built an SOP for any client to adopt, and at the same time, the neutral clean rooms on which we work with Snowflake. So that's on the measurement side to see how can we shift from the broken measurement into more of a agile triple M. And then the other side, which I talked about, you don't need much of data. Very soon, I think we would see brands sending, especially all the agency guys, all the data brokers, that I need less data. I don't need more data because the regulatory will start holding them, and they need to understand what is the minimalistic data that is required in their 1PD. Holding much of the data will bring more regulatory problems, more pressure whenever the data leak happens. So it's about understanding how much you want to collect and what is the implication if the leak happens? What is the penalty that you're going to pay? So with minimal data, like I said, there is opportunity for brands to build brand, to do performance. A recent example, we worked with McDonald's, and I'm sure how many of you would have seen the Squid Game, the series which came on Netflix? Yeah, so it's a cultural movement which was not just in one market in Asia, but across the market. So how can we understand that cultural relevancy, understand is it our target audience watching these types of content, and how can we integrate our brand in that moment when they're watching the content, or how can we take Squid Game as a content and an IP into our environment by making a product or making the audience feel that we are interconnected. And I think we saw amazing result. I can see Adamson sitting here, who leads our McDonald's business across Asia. It gave double-digit growth to brand, not just in top of the mind or the recall, but actually in the sales lift, which is a true testament that with minimal data also, you can actually do both brand building and performance. It's just about understanding how to convert fragmentation and opportunity.
Yep. Richard, are you finding that from some of your, like you said, there's a real focus in Dentsu on live moments, cultural moments. Are you finding that that is proving more effective than other tactics?
Yeah, certainly. And I think the Squid Game example is a fantastic example of doing just that. I'll broaden the conversation. I think the point about brand building is completely right. And I think, we've talked about, do you follow the local data requirements and legislation in each market? Do you conform to the highest standard, or do you lead and be more stringent in your own internal regulations? And I think that gives brands an opportunity to use privacy as a differentiating point of view. And you can see brands like Apple do that. You can see brands like Amazon do that through some of their Ring camera products. I think there are brands that do that, but I think those kind of commitments are very fragile. I think it's easy to group privacy with things like sustainability or diversity, and we've seen companies in the US roll back their commitments to that this year, right? Those D&I programs have been scrapped and sustainability targets have been pushed out. And so I think you would need to be very cautious about how you communicate your view on privacy to the world. And I think we should have a healthy skepticism of businesses that are promoting themselves as being very privacy-oriented, right? So Apple, yes, privacy is inbuilt into the device. It's really something they communicate. I was reading a Forbes article that Apple is hosting global policing summits to advise police forces as how they can use Apple devices to surveil the population, right? That is anti-privacy. The same with Apple, or the same with Amazon, rather. You might buy one of their Ring cameras because you think that will make you more private and safe in your home. That is being sold to the police. So even businesses that are purporting to be privacy compliant, I think we should be skeptical about whether they're doing things they're talking about less that are counter to that.
Yeah. Unbelievably, we're running out of time, so I'm going to move us to a sort of closing question. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask if we could just have a look at those poll results, please. Obviously, we asked people how important privacy is in their role. Very. It's critical to my role, somewhat. it's important but not essential to my role is a minority of respondents. Nobody said not at all. Now, that could be because people chose to come and see this session, so obviously privacy is important to that. But also my opener earlier on today, I mentioned it's one of the key things that people keep reflecting back to us when we ask them what are some of the biggest challenges you're dealing with in advertising, and they very often say privacy. So we know it's a massively important area, but I want to ask each of you where you think the industry is going to go concerning privacy over the coming 12 months. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the role of industry sort of regulation or, you know, kind of aligning industry organisations or cross-industry initiatives to sort of bring that together. And the one final thing I'll give you to think about as you're all reflecting on what you might say is, are we entering into a phase where privacy is going to just become assumed?
I can start with a closing thought on that. We spoke about changing regulatory landscape. We spoke about changing technological landscape, right? We spoke about building the true value with consumers, respecting them. So when you think of it, an example of that would be, let's say, a seat belt in a car. You're not going to wear a seat belt in a car because the coppers are going to catch you later. You're going to wear a seat belt because it's the right thing for your own safety, for your own longevity on this planet. Right? It's like that. You build privacy by design in the organization, not because regulations or the country's new laws are telling you to. That's the right way to approach how to build advertising, how to understand data without picking up on consumers, and then creating meaningful relationships with them. And from our perspective, at least from an Ogury point of view, personified a hybrid approach where you're targeting segments is the way to go. And in terms of the industries, I think the ecosystem's role, the way I see in future is more collaboration between the various players, of course, the brand, the agencies, the tech players. I agree with the point that Bharat made that less data is more, perhaps. I have an example that I was reminded of where a brand said, look, I have these email IDs, tons of them. I know, can you guys just take those and do something with them to find the right audiences? And my answer was like, look, getting those email IDs into my system is going to put me in a lot of trouble, right? Compliance. And the second is the cost it would take to convert those email IDs into some other ID which can be usable on another realm is going to be so much higher. So a simpler way would be understand more about those email IDs, who they are, what they do, where can you find them. Tell us that, and we'll find you more people like that. That's the way we think the future of advertising, while in a resilient and a privacy-first world would be.
Yep. Okay. Great. That sounds that's super interesting. Brian, what do you think? Where do you think we're going in the world of privacy concerning advertising and marketing?
I think we're going to go more and more standardized with all these things coming up with CCPA, with GDPR. I think everyone from a whole has started to standardize their goals towards this really privacy. So that's not going away anytime soon.
Yep.
I think what Bharat said on like clean rooms and measurement, I think I see more brands, especially us, who started, like when we look at what's important to us, is creating our own attributional model based on the data that we have, from sellout rate, from using the different clean rooms. The problem with that is everyone has their own source of truth. So it's like coming with a North Star of like what's effective and what's important to us. I see that coming in, and it's like with the help of our partners, like what Bharat was mentioning, that's going to be very important moving forward.
Yeah, super interesting. Bharat?
I think it's already happening, the shift, like I spoke in the starting. If AI is going to decide how the media planning is done, how the buying is done, and finally how to optimize towards the brand goal, these AI agents don't need any IDs. They just rely on signals. So we are definitely moving in a more privacy-safe world. It's just that as an industry, we need more collaboration. Like I said, I represent IAB as well here. And from a privacy lens, last year we built something called Simpri, which is a simplified privacy. It's a custom GPT about to get rolled out end of this year. We tried to solve India and Philippine regulation in terms of decoding that 50-page PDF what the government has released to me in a more simplified manner so that any planner, any buyer, any brand manager can interact with this custom GPT and get the clarity in terms of what data is privacy safe, where is the data storage being done, what are the mandate, what are the laws. So yeah, I'm looking forward to more collaboration in the industry so that we build more simplified content and create a better knowledge for our market.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bharat. Richard, final word from you?
Well, I think finally, I'm going to take a slightly more dim view, so maybe it's a slightly negative way to end on. But
Bring us down. Just before lunch. Thanks, Richard.
sorry. A few hundred years ago in the US, there were protests about the concept of addresses. Why should I have an address? Why should the government know where I live, right? Fast forward today, every single app on my phone knows I'm sitting here right now, right? That is a huge change in how we think about what is privacy and what is not privacy, do you know what I mean? And I think we're only going in one direction, right? And if I look at the businesses, particularly the AI businesses that are being created today, we've all got AI assistants on our phones, in our homes, we'll have them everywhere. That relies on a huge amount of personal data. The more personal data you share, the better those things get. And I think it is going to become almost completely unavoidable. And so more and more of our privacy will be eroded. And there are good things about that. There are bad things about that. And I think we should be debating these things beyond just the industry and regulators. I think we need populations to debate these things at a democratic level. Like, I think they're that fundamental to our existence and to the world and the economy and the society that we create. But I'm skeptical that we will do that, unfortunately.
Well, it's a massive challenge, but I think the idea of bringing that more into the daily lives of consumers and the population would be a good thing to do. But for the meantime, let's just tackle marketing and advertising. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for that panel discussion session. Thanks, everybody. Round of applause for my
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reid.